Hi everyone, welcome to Azure DIY Season 4, Episode 5. This is Rapid Development on the Power Platform, Zero to Hero, and it's presented by a global black belt from Microsoft, Foo Shen, based in Sydney. So in terms of the season so far, we've had a fairly diverse season. We have so of course today is the rapid development. Next week we have a Purview deep dive, so definitely jump on that, and then followed by a AKS containerization session on the 24th of June. So if you want to sign up for any of these sessions, please scan the QR code at the top, or just go directly to the link, which is aka.ms-azurediy-cic, and feel free to sign up to them. Also, you can find those sessions through our LinkedIn page as well. So that's another way that you can find the sessions. We're also been posting each of the recordings on YouTube, so check that out. A little bit of housekeeping. This session is recorded and will be shared on LinkedIn and YouTube before LinkedIn. Please feel free to ask some questions throughout the session in the Q&A. So there's at the top, you can ask questions at any time, and we'll try and keep the last 5 to 10 minutes at the end of the presentation to go through those questions. A couple Azure announcements. Open source API portal is now generally available. That means you can actually run your own API management portal running on a GitHub page, which is pretty cool. So if you have, say, another API management software somewhere, or a bunch of APIs, and you just want that portal for people to sign up to those APIs, you can actually run that and host that completely separate to API management. Azure Maps Creator is now generally available. This is really exciting, especially in your IoT space, because you can pretty much upload floor plans of indoor spaces, and then you can do visual representations of what's actually happening in those spaces, especially if you start linking some sensors into your floor for, say, heat or tracking foot traffic. There's also, in terms of documentation for Microsoft Docs, there's a general availability of the enterprise scale landing zone reference implementation for AKS. So if you are considering AKS or have already looked into deploying AKS, especially in an enterprise size scale, definitely check out the Microsoft Docs, and you'll see a lot of guidance around that now. So with all that said, I'll hand it over to Foo Shen with what's going to be a fantastic demo heavy session. Foo Shen, I believe you're on mute.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. Good afternoon and welcome everyone to this episode. We'll be talking about rapid development on Microsoft Power Platform, Zero to Hero. So the whole point about this title here about Zero to Hero is to drive from the point on the speed for your time to value in building on this platform. So I'll be running through a couple of demos, and I'll be talking through the platform and show you a bit of examples that our customers are already doing on the platform. My name is Foo Shen Wu. I'm the Power Platform Technical Specialist. I'm part of the global black belt team in Microsoft. So I'm going to start off with the obligatory poster for the family portrait of the Power Platform. You might have already seen or heard some of the names here in this slide. They are all branded with a consistent naming, so there's power and there's something behind it to indicate what it's going to do to help you accelerate those work. So first of all, you see Power Apps. The idea for Power Apps here is to allow you to use a no-code / low-code approach to build an application. And this application can run on a browser. It can run inside Microsoft Teams. It can run on a mobile device, be it Android or iOS. And it allows you to action and to capture the data that you want to work with. So think of a way for you to transform maybe a manual paper-based form on an Excel spreadsheet that business users are really using today, and you want to create an experience on top of it on a mobile device. That will be the tool of choice, which is Power Apps. Once you've captured those data, you will want to process it. You want to put it through a business process. And for that, we have Power Automate. So Power Automate is a tool for you to create a process automation, and that could range between simple orchestration to integrate between various different data sources to the typical approval-based workflows. And we even allow you to do intelligent automation using AI backed by Azure Cognitive Services, as well as robotic process automation, which is a new part of the automation family that we have. And then you have Power BI. I'm sure this is not a stranger to a lot of us here, because Power BI have the advantage of being the first member of the Power Platform to be released by Microsoft a good 5-6 years ago. I can't remember exactly the time, but it's like been there forever. So Power BI is about creating visualization on top of your data. And last but not least, we have the newest member of the family, and that's Power Virtual Agent. Power Virtual Agent allows you to use a no-code approach to create a conversational chatbot that is backed by natural language processing behind it, and you can extend it using Azure Bot Framework, and that allows you to have conversation around your data. Two key points here. The first one is this concept of everything that we put into the Power Platform revolves around data. So data being the center of the gravity here, whether you want to create an application for you to capture or create automation to process it or to visualize it using Power BI, and lastly to have conversation to your data using Power Virtual Agent. So that forms the basis of this whole Power Platform intention behind this. It's all about digital transformation. It's all about allowing you to work and capture your data. So in the end, you get massive amount of digital signals that you can get intelligence out of it. So that's the core purpose of this platform. It's not just one app at a time. We really want to see how our customers can do this at scale. You have hundreds of apps, hundreds of automation that in turn creates massive amount of data that's coming from these hundreds of different business processes, and you can create intelligence at the back of that. Now, to help us along the way, to put the word platform into this Power Platform slide is all about the things that you see at the bottom half of the slide. And that is around the data connectors. How you could use any of these tools out there, be it Power Automate or Power BI or Power Apps, and you can use it to connect to any existing data source. We have 480 plus connectors available to date. Plus, you can create your own custom connectors by bringing in your own microservices, your own API, and have them consumed by Power Apps and Power Automate, as well as Power BI and Virtual Agent. Now, apart from data connectors, you can also work with AI Builder. This is a low-code approach to create AI models or consuming pre-built models. You can create a prediction models, you can create an image object detection model or forms recognition model using AI Builder. And then we also have pre-built models like receipt recognition, invoice processing. All those are baked in so that you don't have to build spend a lot of time to build a model that's used by a lot of different use cases. And then we have Dataverse, and this is the most important piece of this platform. Remember when I mentioned the whole goal of this platform is to accelerate everything you want to do on top of your data, be it automation, visualization, conversation, or capturing. Now, a lot of this thing can be done by creating a consistent data model to represent your organization. For example, you will work with a customer across your organization, and that customer could be represented in 5 different applications, in 10 different automations. If they have a consistent schemas that describe what the customer means to your organization, that will simplify a lot of work across integration and allowing you to connect that definition and the data that is captured into an analytical layer. And that could be your Azure Data Lake or in your Azure Synapse. So Dataverse plays a big part into converting this massive amount of data that you've created using Power Platform and allowing you to create intelligence at the back of that. The last but not least, Power Platform is all about creating things at scale and about creating things at pace. So you want to do this really quickly. We often see customers thinking about the digital transformation journey is around maybe 5 to 10 projects a year. Now imagine if you can accelerate that. Using Power Platform, you can go up to hundreds of different applications that you digitize in a year. Now that's a massive turnaround you can do and massively accelerate your digital transformation project. For it to do at that scale and for it to do at that pace, you really need to have the ability to manage it. So you really need to have an administration layer on top. So you can put guardrails, you can put policies, you can create data connection policies, you can apply ALM discipline on top of it. You can use Azure DevOps and GitHub to manage your code. All these things are made possible through the management tools that's available in the Power Platform. So all these things need to come together. The sum should be greater than its parts. But having said that, we do have a lot of customers to pick and choose which one will be your initial starting point of your journey. Some will start with one app at a time, and then over time they realize that, oh, I'm going to need some additional management policy on top, and then they go into the Center of Excellence Starter Kit, and some may realize that I need to infuse AI and then go to AI Builder. So there's no hard rules to start in any part of this, but the key takeaway here is that it's a platform, it's not an individual product. They were all designed to work better together, and they're all designed so that the sum is always greater than its parts. So that's a key takeaway as the overview for the platform. And the secret to the success of the platform is all about this concept called Fusion Teams. If you have watched our build keynote with Satya, our CEO mentioned about Fusion Teams a few times. Now, we see this as really transformational for a lot of organizations out there. Going back to the point about digital transformation should not be at the pace of your limited IT resources, nor should it be at the sole responsibility of the pro developers that you have within the organization. It could be led by your IT team and your pro devs, but it really should be able to harness the ability for everybody in the entire organization. Digital transformation should be enabled and empowered for everybody. So this concept of Fusion Teams coming together is about how you might create the best outcome by involving business users, IT admins, and pro developers together in a single platform. And oftentimes, this is what we're seeing. You could have the business users empowered using Power Apps and Power Automate so that they can create their own digitization of the processes that they have at hand. And in most cases, your business users will probably be the best position for that because they understood the problem best. Now, having said that, you can also have pro devs and IT coming in to elevate that to make it more scalable, to make it more consistent across your technology landscape for it to use your internal microservices, your API architecture, and extend that using Azure to be a natural part of the platform. So it's the proverbial iceberg. What you see in the Power Platform, Power Apps, Power Automate, and Power Virtual Agent, and Power BI, that's at the surface layer. That's how your end users or your business users will interact and have that experience on top of it. But they're all backed by Azure services, and they can be extended in Azure services as well. And there's a lot of deeper conversation around Pro Dev extension on Power Platform. Now, unfortunately, we will not go into too much detail today. But what I want to do next is to show you what we meant by having this ability to create apps at scale and at pace. So it's all about time to value. It's all about how fast can we get an app out there so that my business users can stop capturing data in Excel and start using a proper digital tool for them to do this work. And then you get the digital signal at the back of that, so you can report on it. You can create intelligence at the back of that. Now, with that said, I'm gonna move my Power Apps screen into the view now. What you see in front of us here is the Power Apps portal. So here is where I can access all the different services that's available in Power Apps. That could include creating apps, as its name implied here. I could create a data model. I could create an operational data model using Dataverse, and that's available through this data tab here. Connecting to Azure Synapse, creating connectors. If I want to bring in an API that I've already built on my within my own services, I can bring that into the connections here in Power Apps. I can create automation through flows. I can create chatbots through using Power Virtual Agent, and I can create AI models using AI Builder here. So everything is available right from the get-go in the Power Apps portal. What I want to show you today is to quickly create a mobile app. I'm going to give it a name. I'm going to call it a customer records. I'm going to create a phone layout. Now, this format here is just the initial layout. I could change that in the settings later on, but it creates an optimum layout based on what the experience that I want to deliver. If I'm building for Teams or desktop experience or maybe a tablet, I should really use tablet. If I'm doing on a phone, it will create a skinny form factor that's optimized for phone with a portrait layout. I could create a responsive layout as well. We can enable that in Power Apps. So you can create dynamic calculation to determine whether you're going on a small screen form factor, more medium form factor, or large screen form factor. So that's a known pattern as well that we have seen, and you absolutely can create responsive design on top of Power Apps. So I'm going to hit create, and what Power Apps is doing now is that it will create the underlying services behind it. It's going to instantiate an Azure App Service that is backing Power Apps. So it's a fully software as a service layer. What it means is that there's zero infrastructure at all, and you do not need to bring in any additional servers or configure anything behind the scene. It's all created as a software as a service. So what you see now is the Power App Studio. This type of app is called Canvas app, and the fact that the name here is a canvas, think of it as a blank screen that you can start drawing things on top of it, and you can start bringing connections into your app and start working with them. The focal point for Canvas has always been experience first. So you do want to create an engaging experience so that the users can start using it. The core principle behind this low code or no code approach to creating an experience is backed by or inspired by how you would want to build a PowerPoint slide. So you can drop any controls here in Power Apps, and you can create a lot of rich experiences through this. I just drop a label here and I can type into it like I would do in PowerPoint. I'll just call it customer records. I can configure the layout and the formatting of it. I can change this just by selecting the right format that I wish to use. I can change the color, set, and that's it. Again, just like, remember, this is just like in PowerPoint, you can just drag and drop, resize and move it, so it's quite easy. Now, if I were to go to File, give it a name and save it, I can publish this app, and I can then start sharing and granting permission to my users, and that users will require an Azure AD authentication. So it's designed for internal employee usage. However, we also support Azure B2B. So if you have external contractors or business partners who you want to extend the app to, you could do that as well. Now, having said that, this will show up in the user's Power Apps app in your Android iOS just by publishing it. No other deployment is necessary, and I've just created as good as what you would call a Hello World style app in Power Apps without any code. Now, this app will have 0 bugs because it doesn't do anything at this point, but I will proceed and add a few more visual elements to it. So I'm gonna bring in a image for the background. So I'm gonna pick for my image folder here, I'm gonna pick some of the stock images in Microsoft. I can bring in, let's say, this group of users sitting around in the meeting. I can set this to fill the entire screen. So now I have a background here. Now I can start adding some data controls here as well. So by doing that, I need to go to this data tab, hit add data, and you can see there's a lot of connectors out here that you can use. So any type of data source that you have in your environment, you could bring it into Power Apps. And one of the good things about it is that it doesn't have to be backed by one source. It can be backed by multiple sources, and a lot of customers are taking advantage of it so that you can build a single experience backed by 5 different systems, for example. The whole point is that your users now do not need to log into 5 different screens and go into 5 different systems to enter the records that they want. You can create that as a single experience so that you get the data in a more timely manner and a bit more consistent in the experience. So to give you some example, we can connect to SAP. If you want to connect it using SAP connector that's certified by SAP, it will be able to use your RFC or BAPI functions behind it. We have an OData connector on the way as well. You can connect to ServiceNow, which is also a widely used ITSM system that a lot of enterprises are using. You could use Salesforce for CRM. You could do that. You could use Oracle database. You could use Informix. you name it. We have a lot of this enterprise data source available. Plus everything in Microsoft is also available. So if I want to connect to SharePoint, anything in Office 365, that's there. Connecting to Teams is there as well. You get the picture, so everything's there. So what I'm going to do is to connect to my customer table here. I'm going to use Microsoft Dynamics. So this is going to be the same source that I will use in Microsoft Dynamics suite of application as well. So this is our CRM system. So I can bring in our list of customer in that table just by connecting to it. The connection don't have to be a data source. It could be an API. So to give you an example, I could connect to Bing API, Bing Maps. I could connect to, let's say, Azure Translation Services, Microsoft Translator. I could connect to weather services, right? So it doesn't have to be a data source. It can be just an API endpoint that will have input and output as part of your services there. So what I've just done is added the accounts table. So what I can now do is add some visualization on top of it to render those accounts. So I'm going to add a gallery. So gallery here is a dynamic control that will repeat dynamically the amount of rows based on the records that I have. So I'm going to set this to accounts, and you can see that it's bringing in some values into here, but you can't really see it because the background image is too in focus, right? It's too noisy for me to see anything here. So how we might solve this, I'm going to use this to illustrate again. I'll drive from the point that you will solve this the same way in PowerPoint. If you have this issue where you can't read the text because the background is too strong, what you do in PowerPoint, or what I would normally do in PowerPoint, is to add a shape behind it as a layer. So the same principle applies in Power Apps. When you design the user experience layer, the user experience screens, this concept of layering appears here as well. So I've just added a rectangular shape. What I can do is to set the fill color, like I said, to white. It's using RGBA code, and the last channel is the alpha channel. This will be in percentage. If I put 0.8, it's semi-transparent. And I can just reorder the layer and bring this back. There you go. Now my gallery is in front, and I have that background image as a subtle background design. So now I have this list of records that's coming from an accounts table. So the next thing to introduce is this concept called formula. So we spoke about PowerPoint-like experience where you can drop things around, move things around, color them, manipulate the behavior through the properties, and then you can connect to a data source or an API using connectors. The next thing we want to cover here is this concept called formula that's inspired very much by Excel. So what it means is that if you have someone in finance who is an Excel ninja, this person should have an easy way to a low learning curve to get into Power Apps. And a lot of times we have actually seen that. So it stands to reason for a lot of organizations to encourage your business users to stop doing things in Excel, stop your macros, but here's Power Apps, and here's where you can do things a lot better. Here's where you can connect to actual data source that you can control and you can govern it. So that's the whole point about making it a low barrier of entry for your business users as well. So speaking of formula, what I want to do is introduce a text box. I'm going to put a text input here. I am going to remove the default and put a hint. I want to search customer here. Now, so the hint here is to search customer. I'm going to do clear button here as well. What I want to do is to introduce formula to perform a search. So you can see that this control is bound to this data source called accounts. The formula for searching is intuitive enough, just called search. And you can actually see what Power Apps will do is to guide the user on as to the syntax of it. And as you type in, well, let me get my. Okay, here you go. It will also guide me as to what's the expected values for my next argument. So I can search into anything that's coming up from accounts. So for example, I can search for account name, maybe. Look for name. I can look for Contact, maybe phone. I think so. I think there's a phone there. No, maybe I just give it its name. There you go. So just by doing this, Power Apps will translate this command into the connector, and the connector will know how to perform a search. So what it means is that if I change this to another connector, let's say to an Oracle database or to a custom API or to SharePoint, you don't really need to wrangle around the underlying API. The connector is actually doing it for you. So in Power Apps, everything has been abstracted and is making it consistent for you so that a search is just a search. You don't need to understand what's going on behind the scene. So just by doing that, if I go here and I type in leadware, you can see that's coming in. Leadware, I can search for it. If I look for adventure, there you go, it's working as well. No code at all, just a simple, I would say low code, just a simple search for that. I'm going to add one more thing before I jump back into the slide, and that is going to add a new screen behind it. So that's screen 1, I could rename it, but I could duplicate the screen. So now I've created a second screen. I can start removing things that I do not need here. So in the second screen, what I want to do is to add a form for me to edit the record. So I might want to update my customer data on the go. I just need to add an edit form, set the data source and point it to the same data source, which is accounts. I can configure the fields. I can bring in more fields here. So you can see all the fields discovered from the connector, and that will be made available to the form. So I'm going to keep it simple. I'm going to keep the three fields here. I'm going to add a button, and I'm going to make this as update. Now, once I hit update, I want this form to be submitted so that it writes back to the system. So on select here, I will do a submit form, and that's it. That's form 1. Now the form itself will have additional property that I can manipulate as well. You can see on failure, on reset, on success. Now on success, I want to do a notify record updated successfully. And I can put a notification type here, which is success. And I can chain multiple formulas together. I can put another command that says back so that it brings it back to the next page. Now, likewise, I can also add an icon at the top. So I'm going to put a back here. That's my back. I can change the color. And this, I can do an on select and do a back as well. So which means on this screen, I can insert a new icon. I can do a plus. Let me do an add. You can move it here. You're free to use your own images. You can upload, and even animated images are supported, so you can do that. Well, what I want to do is to click here, and I want to navigate into screen 1_1. So that brings me to this screen. This screen can update the record. I hit update, and it will go back to the previous screen. Now, this screen here, this is a form control that I want to bind to the item that I have selected. So I can do this. I can reference the gallery.selected. So whichever record that I selected here will be picked out by the control. However, oftentimes you want to do more logic. You want to be based on the selection here. We can also use variables. If you are pro dev, you will be familiar with the ability for you to create arrays or create objects in memory, and everything in PowerS is based off JSON. So you can use the JSON object to reference as part of your logic. I'm going to keep it simple. I'm going to do a set, which is a variable, setting a variable formula. I'm going to say this would be my selected account and reference to this item, which is going to be whatever that's selected here. And I will navigate into screen 1_1 as well. So this gives me whatever selected here will go to the screen, and this screen hit update, it will go back. So just like that, I have a simple app that allows me to search. I can look for my customer data. So my fourth coffee is here. I can search for it. I can browse. I can pick up, let's say, Contoso Pharmaceuticals. I can click here. It loads up this here with the phone number, city, and I hit update. So I'm going to change the phone number here. Now, this is the sample data source coming all of American format. So I'm going to put instead of 0156, I'm going to change it to 256. Hit update. It will update the data behind it through the connector. If you have anything that is based on permissions of the user that's set up in the backend system, it will respect that. So the connector will not bypass security. It goes to actual official API backed by your data source. For example, if you're connecting to SharePoint, if you don't have access to change data, the form will not allow you to change. It will say you don't have access rights to change it. If you don't have access to see any specific data point as well, it will not show up. So you see here that the data point has been changed. Sorry about that. Let me go back here. So now it's 256. So that's what we meant really by low code / no code. You can really work very quickly and focus on the outcome rather than wrangling with the data source, connecting to it and understanding the schema of the API, and you need to work on those. So in any point of time, this could be initiated by a business user who's not technically trained. But what IT could do is to create custom API that allows your business users to consume. So you create a consistent logic behind it, and you can do it at scale. So if your finance need 5 apps and 5 apps will consume your internal API, that's what we meant by fusion teams. You have the IT, pro dev, and business users coming together. Having said that, we also seen a lot of pro devs using Power Apps as a means for you to accelerate very quickly. You can fail fast, you can try things out. A good example is when you create AI model, you want to consume it very quickly. You can actually use Power Apps to try and get the result out, captures few data without going through an actual full-scale development. You can have a result, an outcome very quickly. So, hope that gives a good overview on what we meant by 0 to hero. It's very that quick. I just built an app in, I didn't time myself, but I think probably 5 to 10 minutes, and I have a very functional app with not too bad of a feature set. I can search, I can update, I can scroll and find those records and do all the stuff. So what else can we do in Power Apps? What I showed you is just the tip of the iceberg. Again, it's very short and very contrived so that to show you the idea, the concept of PowerPoint-like design experience, plus Excel-like UI-based logic, plus the concept of connectors. So that's the 3 core ingredients for any basic Power Apps. You need to deal with those 3. But we can go more than that. And you seen earlier, it's the forms over data kind of approach. If you have a system out there, you want to put a form on top of it so that your users can start interacting with it. That's the classic forms over data. But it doesn't have to be that way. In Power Apps, we have seen a lot of customers doing all sorts of different experiences and a lot of wins, a lot of quick wins out there because Power Apps allow you to use the mobile capabilities such as location services, your camera input, your microphones, and recently we also enabled the ability for you to use NFC chips on your phone. So to give you some example here, and this is from Schlumberger, this is a different type of layout. They approach it in a very web-based design thinking. They also incorporate a camera into it. Another example for Schlumberger, if you think about anything that requires some checklist type of input, or maybe an auditing type of input where you want people to fill up a simple outcome, whether it's pass or fail, or any other selection of items, it doesn't have to be the classical check boxes and drop downs. It can be tab oriented, tab focused with a few buttons that brightly coded for you. You can just tap between those options here, like this example between the 2 options in the screen. Another example here is Standard Bank. They use Power Apps for the field technicians to do ATM inspection. So they leverage the camera input capability of Power Apps, and they can take a picture and they can also run it through object detection. You can train it against a computer vision model to detect defects. So before Power Apps, they're actually doing this on paper, and there's not an easy way for them to capture things accurately because they can't really say, oh, there's a crack at the bottom, and they can't really draw that, right? So taking a picture solves a lot of problems, and at the back of that, they create so much more efficiency out of that. And it saves a lot of money as well because they can tie this back to a maintenance schedule and tie this back to parts orders as well. Another example, this is GLJ Taxi. What you see in the middle of the screen here is the planogram. So again, you don't have to capture data in a form. You can capture data visually. So they can just tap on those drinks on the fridge and they can put a status whether this is full or this is space in it. They can visualize this very quickly. One more example here. This is actually a couple more behind this, but here's another example. This is SNCF, train network operator in France. This is a maintenance schedule on a whiteboard with sticky notes and handwritten in different sections of the boards. You probably have seen this in your life. So people have do this in a lot of different ways, not just for maintenance schedule, for project planning, for activity plans, so much more. So what they did in Power Apps is they put it to a grid-like view in the screen below it. You just see this color coding here as well. So things like this attention, it can dynamically shows up in different color. And there's a incorporation of various different elements like toggles as well as the what do you call that? The scale that you can actually drag across it. They took it up a notch after this. They actually created an app for the engineers to do the wheels alignment of the train. And they incorporated the accelerometer on the mobile device, which is also available in Power Apps. We can detect the accelerometer as well as compass and so much more. And they use it to guide the engineers to create a leveling based on the view and the whole alignment of the particular object. Now, before this, when they do this on paper, they got some new engineers who struggle with getting the right value in because they only have text boxes. They do not know which text box correspond to front left and front right or back left and right. So by superimposing the image behind that particular application, it allows them to create the right experience so that any engineers will understand very clearly what's the value they need to put in and what they're recording against. Another example here is for T-Mobile. It's a telco. Now, this particular application is a universal approval app. This has been asked for by a lot of customers that I spoke with. So imagine you need to go to 5 different systems to check on what kind of approval, what kind of action you need to act on. That's going to not create a lot of efficiency. You need to log in 5 different times and go to 5 different systems. Now, the idea for this Orbit app is to surface them all sorts of company initiatives into a single experience. You see different swim lanes. You see the expansion or the accordion format pattern for the approvals. They can click and drop down and get a little bit more details on it. So deliver a single experience, and this runs inside Microsoft Teams for the organization. So now the business managers who need to work on approvals day in, day out, they can have a single pane of glass to see everything that's going on and a single pane of glass for them to action on it. If we love forms over data, we still can do it. So see, here's an example. However, the opportunity is also there for us to mash things up. You see things like an image gallery on the right. You see different cards on the bottom here as well, on top of a form-based layout on the other side of the app. So the opportunity here is really about the agility that you can deliver different types of experience that makes the most sense depending on what you're trying to do. Plus, you get to use the mobile device capabilities like the camera and the location services and so on. Now, that's on the layout. And what I showed you in the demo earlier is the concept called formula. It's really about typing formula to action on those connectors that you already connected. And I showed you this exactly couple of minutes ago, so you can just search on top of it and the connector will do the job of bringing the right data back. But what I want to draw your attention to is the formula at the bottom half of the screen. Now, this is a common logic that we use in a lot of applications today. So we use a filter formula. We filter all customers whose registered date is greater than 7 days ago, right? So basically saying, give me all customers who registered a week ago. And we use it for a lot of cases. We use it to bring in the right number of records back, or to use a cascading dropdown is also a filtering as an example. So a lot of different ways you're seeing this. What I want to show you is a sneak peek of where the direction that this is going. So Microsoft have a sole exclusive rights to the GPT-3 model. GPT-3 is the top language processing model out there. And what we want to deliver now is to have the ability for you to describe in this manner. So you can type in what you want to do is to get new customers from last week, and you hit apply. Power Apps will then generate the right formula for you. So this is great for anyone who wanted to learn and want to discover the formula. You don't have to spend your time even figuring out, hey, what's the formula to achieve what I want to do? You can just leave it to the AI behind this to suggest the formula based on what you describe you want it to do. It's not really new. If you've done Power BI before, you probably have done Q&A and you type in what you want to see, and Power BI actually generates the visuals for you. Now it's the same manner that we are applying here for Power Apps. You can describe what you want to do and it generates the suggestion for the formulas. But it's more than that. It's more than just UI and formulas going around. Again, I give some examples earlier about using the mobile device capabilities. So if you're building an app that requires you to interact with the real world, here's something that we have created really new. You can read a NFC card or an RFID tag and bring the record back. So you can use a simple formula called read NFC, and that's it. It will read a card and you can get the value back and do a lookup based on your data source. We have really done a lot of things like barcode scanning, QR code scanning. All those are available to your camera. If you have any requirement to do address lookups or any geospatial requirement, we also have it in Power Apps. You do not need to stand up your own mapping service. You just need to drop the control into Power Apps and it will just work. So one example here is partial address matching. So I type in half of the address and it looks up for me, and I can just completes that address and it will pin it in the map for me as well. This is backed by Azure Map, and you can put in, you can see the example here, I'm putting multiple address here, and this will allow me to also zoom and pan my map around. You could toggle satellite view, you can bring in traffic information, you can draw a polygon and create zones within the map as well to bring that mapping experience to your app, just like that. We also have mixed reality controls, so we can do a few things. I can do, for example, take a 3D object and you can superimpose into your actual background using your device, mobile device camera. And this example is I can move it around and making sure that the shelf here will look good if I put it in this corner. Another example is to use Power Apps mixed reality controls, and you can use it to measure objects in the real world. You can see here, this is an actual use case in production by GLJ Taxi. They're using it to measure a fridge. And once I've done the trace out the shape of it, it creates a digital block representation of it that can move around and figure out where I could fit within the floor plan as well. So that's mixed reality controls. And we also have AI Builder infused controls that you can use to do object detection. You can count, you can detect using computer vision. You can also detect text over unstructured data, whether it's an image or form. So in this case, we're using form processor. So you can extract key value pairs as well as tabular records and bring that into your application or to your automation. We have pre-built models like receipt processing. We also have pre-built models for invoice processing. And recently we released a pre-built model for identity documents, like for example, your driver's license, your passport, Medicare. We can do all those things. So that's part of AI Builder. We can do a lot of things, including creating prediction models, as well as some of the pre-built models that you can use. We have virtual agent, so we will not go into detail here, but basically allows you to create a conversational aspect for you to just interrogate your data. We have Power Automate. So Power Automate is all about a way for you to quickly create automation, so that expands from API-based automation, or we call it digital process automation. And we can add AI, so consuming AI model here. So this example, I'm taking an attachment as an invoice, adding to an invoice processing model, a form processor here in AI Builder. Start an approval, and this approval here, I can send approval to trigger in Microsoft Teams. So we seamlessly switch between digital process to intelligent application automation through AI Builder to workflow processes using approvals in a single process. We don't have to switch between different tools. And that's more, here's the kicker. Once we have done the approval, we can do a conditional logic. And what I can also do here is to integrate to a legacy system using robotic process automation. So robotic process automation is what we call desktop flow. And again, this is what we call it as hyper automation in the sense that you are seamlessly changing from a API-based integration to approvals to intelligent automation with AI Builder into RPA in a single process. You don't have to switch different tools, nor do you need to use or force everything under RPA or force everything under API-based integration. You can mix and match. So that's hyper automation with Power Automate. But what's really important, the key point here is that the connectors do a lot of magic here. That includes surfacing those underlying API or surfacing the data set to your applications or your chatbots or to your automation as well as Power BI. They work in the same connector framework here. Plus, you can do custom connectors. Some new announcement at the back of this. Remember, I talked about Dataverse as one of the ways for you to work on your data, create your operational data model. So the whole point about Power Apps, the whole point about Power Automate is to capture data at scale and automate them at scale. So you end up with a massive amount of digital data that you can then start to mine. You can then start to reason over it, start to create intelligence over it. So what we have done is to have a single one-click connection to Azure Synapse, and you can bring in all the goodness in Azure Synapse to create your intelligence layer on top of all this massive amount of data that you have captured in Power Apps and Power Automate. So it really is all about low code for the entire process of capture, automating, preparing your data in a data model, processing it to create insights and can consume and visualize it in Power BI or creating it as part of your machine learning models. Along the way, 480 plus connectors that allows you to bring in data from multiple sources and backed by Azure AD-based security and governance that you can use to govern that whole platform. So hopefully that's a quick tour around the platform. It gives you a very good idea about the scale and agility of this. And the key point here again is doing this at scale, doing this at pace, transforming. If you look at this particular diagram, imagine from capture all the way to creating intelligence, that could easily take a few years. But with Power Platform, you really can do this at scale in a very short period of time. That's the value proposition of the platform. With that, we still have about 10 minutes. So I would like to see if there's any question that pops up in the chat window. Okay, so for that, let me see if I can pop into here and see the Q&A. Apologies if you're hearing some noise in the background. So a couple of questions I'll pick up from here. So one is, can you interact with C# functions in the WCF web services within your Power App? Great question, and I love that question. I'm a C# guy as well. I would not be happy if Power Apps can't allow me to bring in my C# functions. The answer is yes. Various ways you can do it. You can create an API in Azure APIM, and that can connect straight into Power Apps. You know what? I think I'll show you a little bit of that. So let me bring in my Power Apps screen here. I spoke of that as custom connectors, and by showing you some options here, it should come in very clear. So here you can add in a custom API. You can add from Azure Service. You can add from an open API definition. So that means if you can describe your API, your C# function or anything that you wrote in PHP or Python, if you can describe using JSON Swagger, or we call it open API now, it will be good to go in Power Apps, right? So you can bring that to Power Apps, or anything that you can export into a Postman collection, you can actually bring it to Power Apps as well. Or likewise, you can import from GitHub, you can create the connector here. The connector that sits here is basically just the definition of it. The underlying logic is whatever tool of choice that you want to use at the end of that API. So that could be in C#, it could be an Azure function. We have customers building AWS Lambda, God forbid, but it could work. The point is that as long as you can describe it using JSON Swagger or Open API, fair game. We can work with that in Power Apps. Next question is, how does a standardized data schema juxtapose against domain-driven design approach in each application having its own perspective? Great question from Phil. So just touched a little bit about the history of Dataverse actually. If you have worked within the Microsoft Dynamics suite of application, this may sound familiar a little bit. So there's this concept called the common data model. The common data model is basically an open source schema that Microsoft put up in GitHub. It's about how we might describe a given business entity or business object. I probably just not the right way, but an object within your organization in a very consistent manner. So what we mean by this is account is an example. A lot of business applications will need to work with account. And this could be different shapes and sizes. If you leave it to every application creating their own schema, they will come in different shapes and sizes. But if you prescribe a consistent schematic, it will, in theory, reduce complexity when you try to transform them from one application to another. But more importantly, when you start consuming it in your intelligence layer. So when you bring this into Data Lake, Azure Data Lake or Azure Synapse, it will need to understand what schema, what shape the data is. So by using common data model, it understands that because it expresses that in that common data model that's understood by Data Lake and understood by Azure Synapse. So that's the whole point of this common data model that we prescribe here. Now, having said that, you could extend the model and you can download industry-specific models. Microsoft have created industry-specific accelerators. We have released a few. We have, I believe, healthcare. We have done it for education. We have done it for non-for-profit, financial sector as well. I'm not really across those, but I believe there's a handful of those that we have released, and that will be very industry specific, domain specific to those industries. Having said that as well, you can't avoid the fact that it will still have different variation even within the same organization. How you might describe a customer will differ from one application to another. So this is where it's absolutely important for us to use data flow. So data flow allows us to extract, transform, and load. So it's basically your transformational way for you to shape the data from one source to another. So if I have to bring this in and hit create, the next interface might be familiar if you're already done Power BI. It's exactly the same engine. We did not reinvent the wheel, but we bring Power Query engine online into Dataverse. So that means you can shape your data accordingly from different sources into a single consistent schematic so that you can work on it more efficiently. Hopefully I understood that's where you're coming from for that questions. And well, there's various tools for us to make it consistent, and every application having their own perspectives is perfectly fine, but you could shape them.
So it looks like that might be it for questions, but I do, because this is Azure DIY, I know you covered a bunch at the beginning of what it means in Synapse and data between the two. In terms of connectors, I noticed that you opened up the Power Platform, well, your Power App earlier, and it even had an API management sort of symbol there. Do you want to mention that a little bit?
Yeah, from the custom connector point of view, you could add your connector from Azure API, or you could just simply upload. Maybe I should show you another one that have custom connector, not in this tenant, but just for that. So I'm going to switch to another tenant. So as long as you can describe the endpoint, the API using Open API or JSON Swagger, you can import it to Power Apps. That's what we meant. So let me show some example here. Let me switch to the right environment and then go into custom connectors. I would have a few created here. Just gonna bring this up so you can see like currency converter. If I were to hit edit, you can edit the JSON Swagger. Now, any new connectors that you add here is actually going to be hosted in the backend in Azure API anyway, right? So It's not a separate API layer in Power Apps. It's backed by Azure APIM, so it's the same thing. Now, if I were to bring in a connector, all I need to do is describe what's my endpoint. So this is actually configuring the Swagger behind it. What's the authentication type, API key, or if I use OAuth, I have a couple of options with OAuth providers. You have a bunch of providers that we can work with, Azure AD being one of them, or you can use basic, which is a username and password pair, or API key, which is quite common for a lot of microservices out there. The definition is what will define what the Power Apps and Power Automate will see in the formula bar. So if you look at currency converter being the option I have here, that means if I put the connector name, which is currency, and I put a dot, currency converter will show up, and this will be mapped to an endpoint in this format. So this will map with 3 parameters, which is amount, from, and to, and that will show up in my Power Apps or Power Automate as well. So basically, it's a Swagger behind it. So anything that you can describe in JSON Swagger, you can bring it here. So if you test an API, regardless of what you use, but because natively we are backed by Azure APIM, we can natively bring that any services that you expose in Azure APIM to here, and that will work much more easier with Azure APIM.
So effectively, you can make an API, host an API management, and serve up that connector natively into the Power Platform. Is that correct?
Absolutely, absolutely. What I love to do most is actually I will use Postman to test my API, and once I've tested that, I can export that Postman into a collection, and then I can import that Postman collection right here into Power Apps.
That's fantastic. I'm just double checking in terms of questions. We do have another question. Can Power Automate interact with Dynamics 2013 data sources, or does it have to be Dynamics 365?
Very good question. So that question is literally about how you might interact with on-premise data sources. Now, in the Power Apps stack, the entire thing is software as a service that's backed by Azure, which is platform as a service behind it. For us to interact with, to cross the divide between cloud and on-premise, we need an infrastructure called the Microsoft Data Gateway. So if you look it up, it's the same gateway that we use across multiple products. You need to install it. And this can be installed as a cluster if you want to load balance and create high resiliency scale as well. Or you need to have the Data Gateway installed on your premise or at the edge. And what happens is that it will listen to a service bus behind it, where Power Apps, Power Automate, or Power BI or Azure Logic Apps will interact with the data on premise using this gateway. So for you to connect anything, that can be Microsoft products like SharePoint or custom API to interact with those. And to be more specific to your questions about Dynamics, the Dynamics connector does not support on-prem gateway. So for you to connect to Dynamics, you either connect to SQL, which is not recommended behind it because you bypass the APIs, or you connect to the API. So not really as a native connector, but through an API layer that connects to your your Dynamics REST API, if that makes sense.
So effectively, instead of using the native connector for D365, if you have 2013, you have to use their API, which should be available on your Dynamics 2013 deployment on-prem.
Yeah, you have to use a custom connector to do that because you need to go to a gateway to connect to on-prem API. But that's the same pattern that you would use across all other on-prem resources. The only exception will be SharePoint and SQL, because SharePoint and SQL, you can use the native connector to connect to your on-prem services. But you still need the Data Gateway regardless.
Yeah, so Data Gateway is a must. Awesome.
That's right.
Thank you so much, Foo Shen. It's been great. Great having you on, and you've shown some great demos and crazy amount of knowledge, especially in the Q&A, spinning up more demos for everyone. So awesome. Thank you so much for coming on here, and I guess we'll finish up there.
Thank you, everyone, and have a good day.
Thank you, everyone.
Cheers.